Good morning, everyone. I was going to say dear authorities, but I'd rather say dear friends because I see familiar faces, so dear friends. First of all, I would like to thank Jordi Ros, the director of the school, the fact of having invited me to give this opening lecture, and maybe the last one for me because the university is retiring me in November. So this is a little goodbye from me. Today I would like to talk to you about the school that I have lived, one of the schools that has coexisted simultaneously during this latest half a century. I would like to cover the more personal side of the story in the beginning because I believe it's the right thing to do, and then I'll move to the collective side of things and I'll talk about the school and the university as institutions. I would like to cover the two conditions, so I will wear the two hats: professor, project professor, and architect with his own study that has been in the profession, because of course I would not be able to separate both activities. Secondly, I would like to pay tribute to professors and students with whom I've had a relation for these years in the school. So the title of my paper is 50 Years in 50 Minutes. After the beginnings in the School of Medicine, after taking the course in the Central University, I started my career in this school in 1964, so 50 years ago. The 60s were times of turmoil in the university with continuous strikes. We were being closed by the government assemblies, demonstrations, police attacks. Even in here, I've seen horses in the hall, really, and the secretary's office turned into an infirmary with the Capuchinada included, as it's called, in March 66, that of course led to the professors and delegates having their records. So committed years, these facts started to shape a school that started to change in the late years of Franco's regime. Among the professors that had their record open, we had Federico Correa, who was the leader of the first course, the legendary first year, with this famous topic of the bank in the beginning. So I was lucky enough to attend some of his corrections, and next year, subsequent year, without Federico Correa, I actually was taught by one of his professors, Pep Alemany, still actually the leader of all those that came later with his splendid kiosk in the Ramblas, FAT Award 1973. In the subsequent years, in the project subject, I chose Ballesteros and Cardenal, authors together with Gimona and Ruiz Vallés of the Jewelry, Monets, 1962. They were professors, and they were good professors, ready to dialogue, ready to make efforts, good architects. And then I met, halfway through my career, José Senillosa, an architect that was not very well known, but I had seen his shop, his motorbike Montesa in his shop, a little marble. Senillosa, a professor with serious health issues, enabled me to enter into a relation with the Barcelona architecture and then Cadaqueses architecture, where he had fixed for himself a marvelous little house. In this course, in this subject, we would work on projects covering some apartments at Garraf, and he saw my drawings for the project, of course, and he asked me to work in his study, and then I could develop a real project for one of these dwellings that actually was built years later. Last year of my studies, together with Roberta Radas Villa, he was my professor, I chose Norman Cinnamon, a young professor, admirer of Federico Correa, good interior design, and I could actually collaborate with him after my studies in a project of a prototypical apartment for the FAD Hotel, FAD House Hotel, 36 square meters. Some of the students probably remember this. Now, about these years, I remember two lectures given at the school. One by Richard Neutra, he spoke of architecture and nature, and Javier Sainz de Oiza, he covered astronomy mainly. And also I remember some subjects on structures, fantastic, like those by Professor Bordeaux, an interesting symposium with mathematician P. Calleja, some lectures on descriptive geometry, interesting and difficult to understand by Professor Canosa. So that was my orthodox learning experience. For many years, Jose Antonio Codec had a presence as a professor in 1964, and even if I mean that was not supposed to happen, I decided to attend his classes and to submit my projects for his corrections. I worked on a single family detached house in the Maresma that I corrected with him. Then I presented to him drawings of the plan of a house, Codec style. I was really satisfied about that, but he actually destroyed it all, destroyed my project, and he said, Ferrater, that is so wrong. Your project has no structure, no order, so please do organize it. I asked him how I was supposed to do, and his answer was, look, I've built some houses, right? So go, visit them, take a look at them, and learn. And that was the end of his correction. Those were his words. Now, in these visits that I actually took, and we have 8mm videos, by the way, that you can check. I learned a lot of things. I started with the Casa Catasus, 1966 in Sitges, Casa Auriac in La Mella del Vallès, 1961, Casa Roces in Rosas, 1962, Casa Gili in Sitges, 1965. And after my studies, I had the chance of get to know Casa Senillosa for a weekend. A little building stemming from the autochthonous architecture in Cadaqués, assuming abstraction and formal depuration, so the contemporaneity of those times. To finish with the influences in my career, I visited several times the so-called Taller de Arquitectura, the architectural workshop, together with Ana Bofill, who was studying with me, and Peter Hodkinson from Cadaqués, and Xavier Bagué Bofill, cousin and partner to Ricardo. At the time, the drawings, the drafts of the Ciutat de l'Espai, the space city, with this air of innovation, provocation, futurism, it really struck me, and I was really interested in that. That was one of the influences. I drafted and I actually gathered a lot of information, a series of projects of urban utopias. Iona Friedman, Paolo Soleri and his integral theater, Youngman and his pneumatic cells, Kurokawa and his metabolic architecture, Cousteau and the underwater cities, Buckminster Fuller with Manhattan and the geodesic dome, the Heron City, Paul Maimon, the Pluck in city of Archie Graham, Peter Cook, you can imagine. So you will see what's left of all this in the year 2000. Hundreds of attached houses, pseudo English style all over the world, and that is how we reach 1971. As a student still, I started to help teaching in the latest course, latest year in the studies, together with Fernando Bendito, also a student himself, and we organized the Instant City in Ibiza. In Spain, those were years of political subversion, so counterculture in the world. May 68 in Paris, we witnessed the great music festivals, Woodstock 1969, that in the Isle of Wight 1960, so in 1971 we went to Ibiza, and that is how and why we decided to create the Instant City within the ICSID, organized by Adi Fab. So we had a manifesto and a poster, the Free Universities of California, and that was sent also to countercultural groups in Latin America, England and the Nordic countries, India, Japan, Australia, so that we could call on the students to come to Cala San Miguel in Ibiza to build together an ephemeral city. where work and leisure and counterculture were the raison d'etre, as a way to protest against the bourgeoisie mentality that was invading the discipline of creation. So with the help of Josep Miguel de Prada, author of those inflatable houses in Madrid, and with the help of Ace Condell, we traveled to Ibiza to build together for a month the instant city during the month of September. So it was a city that suddenly appeared and would disappear when the inhabitants would abandon it. The raison d'etre of that city was change in itself, impermanence, so that was the challenge, the concept of an instantaneous city, an ideological term, so like refusing the city that tries to define the behavior of the inhabitants, trying to awake a new awareness that claims for leisure, to turn it into work, and calls for human nature and creation. That is when I prepared my end of the career project, the yacht club at La Scala. Of course, the school was closed, and I had to go with my project to the different offices and knock on different doors, Terradas, Bohigas, San Martí, and I got a closed envelope with my grade, so the correction, but the professors didn't communicate among themselves. So when I opened the envelope, the average grade mark for me was B, and that is what I have in my academic records. Also in 1971, I created my first study, architecture study, to people in a mechanical workshop at the Riera San Miguel Street, and that is where I created my first project, the proposal for a tender that wasn't held in the end in Santiago de Chile, end of the Allende's term, and then we got an award actually years later. We got an award, and Emilio Donato published that in the Quaderns magazine. Xavier Bagué Bofill also helped me in proposal for Cala Conta in Ibiza. That was not realized, but it was actually exhibited in an exhibition called Placeless Architectures, curated by Antonio Pizza. 1972 to 1974, in the school as an assistant professor. Those were calm years with the professorship of Robert Terradas. So we worked in hotels, in places like Maresme or Costa Brava, with professors like Barba Corsini, Pablo Ayesta. I worked also in interior design, and there was a shop of tapestries and carpets that was a finalist for the FAT Award 1973, and I wanted to get to know the different professions through interior designs, and these works were complemented with other research works and ephemeral architectures like pneumatic structures, those in Benidorm, Morferia del Campo in Madrid, and then in the end I could realize my first architectural work, some houses in San Just, projected in an abrupt slope and with the eyes placed in Coderc, and today, 40 years later, they are well maintained, and in the 80s they were part of the architectural catalogue at the metropolitan area of Barcelona. 1975-76, end of Francoism, Barcelona was led by Porcioles, Robert Terradas died in 1976. A group of architects started to gather together data, so creating a file of the condition of the dwellings at the Santa Catarina district, and after studying the historical process in the district, the buildings of interest, the urban town planning, that proposed several ways of remodeling the old district, since the Pla Sardà to get to the Pla Macià, and with the idea of actually opening up the whole district with great avenues and in a way to destroy the district, sort of a speculative maneuver. And since the 5th year, we decided to work on a series of proposals that would respect the urban fabric and that would revitalize the area with projects, new dwellings, with the existing typologies, by building squares, public space, equipments for the community. So 200 students from this school worked individually and in groups in elaborating these proposals, focusing on two areas: the blocks placed in between the streets San Sant Pere Més Baix and Gombau, and the series of squares surrounding Sant Pere, Sant Agustí, El Vell, and the Academia Square. And we sort of claimed against the destruction of the district. The students went to Copenhagen trying to see how they had refurbished the old district. We had José María Montané among those students and others that later on taught in this school. And then in the Llano magazine, issue 42, there was a monography devoted to the works stemming from these schools. So looking to the past, that course was really fruitful, but it has its lights and its shadows. After Roberto Terradas died, in class we had Javier Cárdegas. There was a pedagogical organizational gap, and then I was asked to travel to Ibiza to ask Raimon Torres whether he wanted to lead this 5th year in the studies in the school, and he accepted. Raimon Torres asked Jaume San Martí and me to collaborate, to organize the course in 1975 and 77, and they moved to the evening classes where Carles Martí was, together with Antonio Armesto, Iago Bonet and others. They would create the Construcción 2C, that image that you see in the screen now. That is another of the schools that have simultaneously coexisted during those years. But of course, Carles Martí would be the man to talk about that. 1977, well, we have the incorporation of Oriol Bohigas to the school. He would direct it till 1980, and those years Oriol transformed the school. He turned it into one of the best schools in Europe. He would elaborate the new curriculum 1979, and he extended the school to Coder. He would revitalize the Department of Project with public corrections, invading the whole school in a demonstration of transparency. He would reinforce his professorship with professors that were among the best architects in Barcelona. So we created a good core that later on, years later, they would transform the city. End of the 80s till the Olympics in 1992, and of course he led also important projects, urban projects with the Barcelona City Hall, and some people and some students from the school actually collaborated. It's the so-called generation of the golden pencil generation. One of the first actions by Oriol Bohigas was to ask Rafael Moneo to take the first year and to actually be part of the jury. Moneo accepted, but they wouldn't be able to cover the first months because he was in Harvard. Oriol Bohigas was pragmatic enough, so he invited Luis Peña and Segle, and for the first months he would substitute Rafael Moneo. So with José Antonio Martínez La Peña and the other professors in the course, together with Luis Peña, we would read and interpret the writings, the letters, the program, literature that Rafael would send us from Harvard. Moneo said that the curriculum was an alternative to the orthodox teaching that was too contextual and academic, so he would question what routine, he said, turns into inevitable. And I suggest to step out of a known ground to enter into another less explored but maybe more generous one and more fruitful. So the value of the context was not determinant for him, and that was a clear provocation at the time. He used to say, and I quote, "The architect understands the context whereby architecture is produced, but he needs the support of a discipline that allows it to approach the formal definition of the work. So the objective of the course is to face the difficulties of the project without any protection, without any defense. So it's high time we actually do the exercise without any safety net whatsoever to reassure us. If we believe in the grand scale, it's not because we consider that the discussion doesn't incorporate other more reduced proportion in the public building. It's very important. The discipline is there, and to build architecture with discipline. Maybe the future architect is defenseless, but that is the attitude that will enable him to understand what his task is." End of quote. So stemming from the Beaux-Arts composition with over 35 titles. We would continue discussing the literature, revising anthologies by Le Corbusier to end up with some considerations on the work and the literature by Louis Kahn. On the exercises, he would suggest to be as neutral as possible, to work on urban peripheries, to work on all districts, and he would end also by asserting, and I quote, "What we seek is the pretext to work at a scale whereby architectural invention is absolutely necessary, the most important thing, the only substantial thing." End of quote. That is his definition. So we dealt with these topics: the School of Music in the Raval, the Maritime Station in the Barcelona port, 1977-78, and the stadium for 40,000 people in San Joan d'Espí, and a shopping mall at the Carrer Pelai with a hotel and services included. The literature suggested took Luis Peña to actually devising the first exercise, taking the Beaux-Arts consideration in its purest approximation, so working on symmetries, composing axes, perspectives. When Rafael Moneo led the jury, he said, to our surprise, that it hadn't been duly interpreted, and we should have granted the approach much more freedom. Luckily, Luis Peña was a little deaf, and he didn't actually grasp that. And that was my turn that day. That day was my turn. Moneo asked me to present a work by 3 students in my group that I picked among a lot of students. Bet Gali, Moisés Gallego, and Ramón Godó were my choice. Bet and Ramón, they had their piano studies. Bet Gali liked to provoke, and he drafted a grand piano. And the plan was very well solved, functionally, formally, and Moneo had nothing to say about that. Moisés Gallego, a student that had his experience and he was very well prepared, technically speaking, he presented a project, and these are the first drawings by him, and they were very welcomed by Luis Peña Ganchegui. It ended and it all ended up with Ramón Godó's project, School of Music, splendid, very well devised, and Rafael liked it. He asked him to express what the sources were. They wanted to know what the sources were, so he asked Ramón Godó that direct question. And Godó answered that he was very much alert to good architecture and all the masters, he said. Moneo insisted in his question, and then the answer was Coderc, and that was the end of the correction. Next year, when Rafael Moneo proposed this great stadium, 40,000 spectators, the professors, we said whether maybe it was too complex for a first year project, and Moneo reassured us because probably the rows of seats would be correct, would be okay if we drew them with a beam compass, and many of the students did, and it was worth it, to see him work. In the end, the result was excellent, and we all learned something else about scale and discipline and grand dimension. By the end of 1979, Moneo left the school in Barcelona for the second time. That year was very important for me. I finished my first solo work, some apartments in L'Estartit, and in the opening ceremony we had Oriol Bohigas. He said to me, "Ferrater, you are crazy. How can you project a building made of wooden laths in front of the sea?" And I said that those were bricks without vertical joints, and they just were painted white. José Luis Mateo, Eduard Bru, they published in issue number 144 of the Quaderns magazine this story. There was also an article about Casa Ugalde, and there were 2 works by young architects of the time. Actually, they presented the house for their parents in Satuna and my apartment in L'Estartit. Rafael Moneo proposed as a substitute Oriol Bohigas, but actually it was Luis Nadal who accepted the invitation. He said, I am not a professor, but I am an architect in the fight, and that is the way he planned teaching architecture. A different way of understanding how architecture is taught, even if what united him to Rafael Monet was the way they valued discipline. Nadal admired Duran Reynal's work, his master, so he recovered those topics, the hotel in Queralbs, Girona, Startit Bagnola, so he would complete this minor dimension with an intense creativity. We had small pavilions, museums of small dimension, the Parc Cervantes. I shared teaching at the time, teaching the 5th year, with Martín La Peña, Roberto Terradas, Canosa, Nadal, Llimona, Perna, San Martín, and Iago Conde. Luis Nadal covered this 5th year between the years 1979, then 82, and then 83 and 86, and I could actually work in my workshop and work on the landscape with Bert Figueras in 1984, working on the extension of the Diagonal Avenue, taking it to the sea. For those years I developed small minor projects that Luis Nadal liked, just like the pavilion in Torroella, marvelous building, the Garbi building in Estartit, some dwellings projected after work to Finland in San Just Desver. But Luis Nadal then, before leaving, said the contrast and the discussion between opinions don't necessarily match, and that enriches us, that enriches the way in which we value architecture. The students need to understand the relativity, ambiguity, vagueness and contradiction that is inherent to the task of an architect. He said that the touchstone is daily correction by means of a dialogue between the professor and the student, with the drawing as the only support. It is necessary, he said, to learn that the initial idea has to support the progressive definition of all the parts that made the project, and he would end by saying that the quality of architecture has to find its justifications in its own limits, functionality, construction and economy. And then he will continue with the course on the literature.
Nadal recovered a text by Rafael Monet and included it in our curriculum. We only translated it and says, throughout the course, each of the professors will explain some of their works. Only the author can recreate the objective and mood factors, and only he is able to make sense of them. And this appearance of the professor in front of the students is the key to the desired communication, and it's a practice which is admitted within the most orthodox currents of architecture learning and teaching. Amongst many of the study travels throughout those years, I would like to highlight this initiation and learning trip, a journey that we took with professors and teachers of the Valles School under the direction of Luis Nadal. We went to the Peloponneso in Greece. We went throughout the Doric route with José Antonio La Peña, Josep Linas, José Luis Canosa, Pere Llimona, and an extraordinary group of students. At the end of 86, Luis Nadal decided no longer hold the professorship of the 5th course, and then he left for the School of the Valles, where he created a new school. And he proposed as his replacement Jordi Garcés. Between 86 and 88, Garcés proposed different topics that were very influential in Tarragona Street and next to the Plaza España, the Spain Square. In 1988, in a very difficult tender with 10 professors of this school, we became professors, Jordi Garcés and myself, with a bicephalous jury where Javier Carvajal and Oriol Igas were the main characters, with an explosive mix and with a great camaraderie and coincidence of criteria and judgment. we decided to do something different, not about Le Corbusier. Boigas and Boigas and Carvajal were very happy with this class. Oriol taught me that in that school there were only two solutions: that projector professors learned to build, or that professors of construction learned to project. And for him it seemed that the former was easier. And the Department of Construction at the school has had great architects, amongst others Ignacio Paricio, without forgetting Álvaro Luciza Vieira, and then Jordi Garcés was in charge of the first course of the studies as a legacy of Federico Correa. I knew 1989 was a very important year in my training and learning, because I won, together with Beth Figueras, Jod El Canosa, and a group of botanic scientists, a tender for a new botanic garden in Montjuic, with the idea of extended it on the mountain, an idea that we developed at the Maxim laboratory through a program with the first Apple computers that arrived at the school, thanks to Felix Arranz and Julián Galindo, two very promising students in that experience that helped us win the tender. Over that mesh, the program recreated the different fighter episodes of Mediterranean plans in a simulation of of Humboldt's travels in the discovery of Mediterranean flora. And then we won the tender of the Olympic Village in Poblenou, together with Josep María Montaner and Bet Figueras. I remember Professor Josep Ketglas. I was at the 6th floor of this building, watching as the concrete blocks were installed for 24 days and nights. It was the first time that this structure was used to build these walls. This technique that was usually used in silos. And they told me, Ferrater, do you realize what you are doing? And 4 projects in the 4 Olympic areas that meant a great quantitative leap compared to the projects that we had created in our small study at the Bertrand Street. The professorship that I coordinated back then was composed by Art Terradas, José Luis Canosa, José María Torres Nadal, Enrique Miralles, Joan Pascual, Antonio San Martin, and Iago Conde. And they were working together with young professors such as Felix Arranz, Isabela de Rentería, Elena Cánovas, Elena Fernández. José María Torres Nadal and Enrique Miralles came from that magnificent professorship of Albert Vilaplana, and Rick did not come much to the school because he was traveling around the world giving lectures. When I won my first exam, when I passed my first exam of the first professorship, Serra Hunter, Carlos Ambricio, member of the jury, together with Elio Piñón, Josep Montagnola, Alberto Campo Baeza, and Ignacio Paricio, highlighted a differential factor in my training as a professor, which is that for a time I had been assistant of Rafael Moreno, and I had Enrique Miralles as a professor when I was in charge of the professorship of the 5th course. Iago Conde has been a student of ours, and he was a professor of the IAA in London, and also had some stints at American universities such as Columbia University, and I collaborated with him in a small work for graphic design study in an old textile factory. Iago always asked me to explain to the students the experience of the instant city, and I denied and I refused every year. After his premature death, untimely death, I opened the following course with an opening lecture about the Ibiza Utopia in 1971 in his memory. After the 1992 Olympic Games, the crisis arrived in 1993, and later it was more important to devote more time to formal research, and then we created works such as the marina in Lestartit, the Impiva building in Castelló, the first house for my brother in Llampayas, and the fitness center, amongst other works such as the cinema studios or the school of Lloret. Those years were very intense. In the decades between 90 and 99, we developed democratically and without any hierarchy with that group of professors, professorship before the research project, the end of studies project, with very dynamic courses and with a lot of professional dedication, both from professors and students. Project for the Zaragoza Delicias train station, for example, and other very important works. In 1993-1994, we proposed the embassy and the consulship of Berlin, and after this series, in 1995-96, the church and parochial center in Rome, which had a great international impact. Those large format exercises, following the principles of Rafael Moneo, are complemented by minor exercises of ephemeral nature, but very intense ones, such as the inhabited garden, houses for birds, and the game of architecture that we developed in a couple of weeks, and with models in scale 1:1, in which the assessment process became automatic. I remember from those years that a trip in a very special train. These were exercises by Jobs, for example. Well, I remember a trip in a special train with wooden cars in which professors traveled in the Azaña car, and then we discovered the location of the future station, the lighting tests with the model of the church of the student Ivan Pomés, the study trip to Rome, or the correction of project from the embassy in Berlin from an Erasmus student. And we can extract from that time the teaching mechanics and some exercises of published in Antecedentes. In those years, with Felix Arranz, we worked intensely in other parallel academic projects. In 1993-95, with La Petita Dimensió and Enunciar Projecta, I gave summer classes at the International University Menéndez y Pelayo in Santander, commissioned by Ernest Duke. And we get to 1999, which where we proposed the alternative of a mixed professorship within the UPC and the EDSUP, which would be the first in its kind. In 1999, we signed an agreement with the sector, Jaume Pagès, the director of the school, Eduard Bru, and the heads of the enterprise. The rector gave 3 reasons because of which the mixed professorships could be very interesting. They bring the university much closer to the real world, not fostering academic inbreeding. And secondly, they provide resources to an economically depressed university, and they also provide more resources for research and laboratories. And that made us think that mixed professorships could be an alternative to the excessive proliferation of private schools throughout Spain, which were as many as the public ones. And they admit that certain schools, such as La Salle or the International of Catalonia, very well complement the academic supply in Catalonia. On this basis, Alberto Penin, we created a group of projects in the last course between the second and the third cycle of studies, the graduate and the postgraduate schools, that was foreseen in the Bologna plan, with better financial resources in order to improve teaching, with invited professors with technical symposia, with visits, with the possibility of carrying out exercises that were more realistic in nature, training young professors amongst the best students, and together with the Center of Technological Transfer of the UPC, to create a space, an area for research. And also seminars and workshops with, for example, like the one with for the Olympic candidacy of Madrid, and all that with the possibility of publishing every year the works that, in order to complement the compilation Last But One, which articulates the teaching projects throughout certain strategies with teaching objectives. Together with invited professors, proposing every year review of intentions, avoiding the freezing down of teaching goals, and with the conviction of creating a convergence between teaching activities and professional practice, understanding that the teaching project is an open and an inclusive experience. Throughout the 6 years of this teaching experience and the professional area, there were years of experimentation with projects and works devoted to landscape. When Ramon Sanabria, and on behalf of the professors of the professorship that have been trained by Oriol Boigas, proposed that I took charge of the course as a recent professor after winning my state exam, I decided to accept with the approval of the director of the school, and together with Alberto Penin, we went to the third course in a professorship made up entirely by associated professors, all of them professors of that mythical professorship, most of them about to retire, which is something that happened in the following years. Professors who, however, retired, still came to give the courses on projects with the same enthusiasm and intensity as they had been showing for so many years before in their careers. The task was to reconstruct and to update the teaching project, which is very important for the training of future architects in the center part of the studies, where students make decisions of become real future architects. A course with the topic of housing, which is the main foundation of the construction in our cities. Equally, renewal and of the professorship with young professors, with looking for the parity. 50% of students are women. Creating a professorship so that we're able to tackle the issues, the new issues that are faced by architecture and society. And we decided, with a little budget that we had, to keep up the mixed professorship figure that enabled us to keep up the cycles of talks, grants, and to create a website and other academic activities such as the editorial project Palimpsesto, a very important and ambitious editorial project. In these 8 years, the professorship is consolidated with new professors. A new teaching project is yielding excellent results, and the level of the last course of projects is one of the best ever. And this is what we told our students last year. This teaching project will be presented in Palimpsesto Editorial next November, when Alberto Penin will become in charge of the coordination of this group. And also in the last few years, our study has experimented with different projects in the area of housing, dimensions, programs, and urban situations, as well as other complex projects. Projects, and this is always about the relationship between academia and study, with a very important stress on theoretical corpus that has been built in the last few years. And then we have the projectual sequence stemming from the metropolitan city and the collective housing up to the appearance of the single-family homes that is linked to the constructions of an inhabitant in its social and personal world. This sequence scales from 1 to 1,000 and 1 to 1 for exercises over 2 single locations that coincide in time with the 4-month organization of project courses. Every year we have different consolidations and morphology, understanding the city of Barcelona as a project experimentation laboratory, which is an exercise that is understood as without the context, focusing on the resolution of the program of housing units, stressing typological invention and innovation of aggregation forms, and unveiling in the second exercise of the first trimester the location in a neighborhood of the city of Barcelona, including the contextual and urban dialogue, and creating the first and the last document on the project, the location plan with an expression of the project's trajectory. The second part of the course, and in the area of the small dimension sphere of intimacy, the relationship with the landscape is explored, favoring the relationship between place and architecture. The construction of a character, the inhabitant of the house, aims at defining uses rather than programs, because these projects of small dimension can be then the seed of future architectures, becoming a research material for individual and collective work. From the point of view of individual work, the loneliness of the creative work is explored, and as a final paper, the workshop in the mobile Hausian sense becomes a meeting point, a collective meeting point, in which the thorough definition of selected exercises allows to close the course with intensity, being food for thought and making it possible to participate and to collaborate with professors of other subjects. And this is very important for us at our school. I wouldn't like to finish without telling you about the school that I would like to leave as a legacy. The last question of an interview that made it me. What would you do if you were director of the school? I was asked in that last question. Well, some answer this question, some don't, some alluded. And Palimpsesto had an interview, will have an interview with me as well, and I'm sure that I will be asked this question, and I would like to tell you about the school that I would like to leave behind. I think that we should have one single architecture campus, merging the 2 public schools of Barcelona and El Vallès County. I don't know, here or there, I don't know about that. Involving construction studies, also road engineers, because I think that they are closest to architectures and civil construction interests than to other engineering studies such as textile, industrial, which is what I expressed in my opening lecture last year. A school with a great specific weight, with a lot of content, with a good budget, a director would be the main stand with determining ideological, teaching and organizational goals of the school. Being a leader, one department school or, if that's not possible, departments which are linked in a single logistic organization, with the subject of project as the main figure of the training, removing instrumental projects of other technical or theoretical subjects that detract from the real value of the project. A school with important subjects such as architecture history, construction, other structures that are given in isolated areas and with a solid theoretical corpus, retrieving descriptive geometry not as a graphic surrogate with a computer, but as a main tool. A school that is supported by companies and by institutions, thanks to mixed chairs or through agreements, because of the lack of resources that we all suffer. A public school, prioritizing undergrad studies as the most important phase of architecture teaching, demanding a high level to access the third cycle, the postgraduate studies, and also the access to doctorate studies and master's degrees. A real professional training school, and a specialization masters reserved to broaden the scope of possibilities in the professional career. A school that really takes care of associated professor with the contracts of 4 or 5 years in length, in duration, professors that are chosen amongst the best professionals in international and national architecture, that are able to convey knowledge, and amongst those to favor those who decide to devote themselves more intensely to teaching, thanks to aid grants and with a good postgraduate cycle, counteracting the professionals in teaching and constructors of curricula. This double capacity of professional with the ability of conveying architectural knowledge has to be the main feature of our schools. Professors and teachers from other departments and subjects such as Joan Margarit from Structures, Ignacio Paricio from the Construction Department, Manuel de Solá Morales from Urban Planning, Elias Torres from Landscape Architecture, Santi Roqueta from drawing, and so on and so forth. They are from other departments, and as Ignacio Solá Morales said, another great professor in this house, architecture is conveyed from teachers to students, and I would add, who are, to a lesser or to a greater extent, self-teaching.